Yeah.
Okay. Welcome to today's Google Hangout. Today we got a great show with some great guests, and we're going to talk about apparatus committees, and we'll focus a little bit on aerial and rescue, heavy rescue apparatus. And we also have some big news coming out of New Haven today that we'll let you in on in a little while. New Haven firefighters, for the first time in, I believe, fire department history, the executive board unanimously took a no confidence vote today in a piece of apparatus. So we'll be getting into that in a little bit. With me today, I have John. John, can you introduce yourself for our viewers?
I'm John Valentini. I work for Rosenbauer of America. I'm the Southern New England sales representative.
We've been working with John on our apparatus committee. He's been an invaluable resource.
Well, thank you.
And today we also are being joined by our new host of our Google Hangout series on health and safety, the last Wednesday of every month, Robert James, known as RJ. RJ, if you could introduce yourself to our viewers and then introduce our guest from Montgomery County, Maryland today.
Good afternoon. I'm RJ, Robert James. I'm a career firefighter in Frederick, Maryland, assigned to Rescue Squad 3 and a 15-year veteran of the Rockville Volunteer Fire Department. Started as a living at 18 years old with the Rockville Volunteer Fire Department right out of high school, and currently still a volunteer with Rockville and a active captain with the Tuesday night shift. Alongside me today, I have one of my near dear friends, as well as Deputy Chief of the Rockville Volunteer Fire Department.
Great. So let's start off with apparatus committee. And when New Haven was putting out a bid for a new rescue truck, a new heavy rescue truck that the department didn't have. And in full disclosure, negotiations are still underway with the union to put the truck in service. We kind of did it a little bit backwards. We started negotiating going on, and then the department actually got a grant. But we put together a committee, not to speak for the union, but to work on health and safety issues and how the apparatus should be put together. So we worked with John, and also we worked with RJ. And the reason why networking is so important is when I was a volunteer in Rockville, Maryland as a live-in, they had a walk-in rescue. And then there was a trend across the country to go to walk-around rescues. And because of networking and because we reached out to RJ, we found out some reasons why the rest of the country now is starting to go back to walk-in. So it seems that what's old is new again. So RJ, do you remember some of the issues that you brought to light for New Haven of why the walk around wasn't as advantageous as we originally thought?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up, Frank. That's one of the highlights of obviously the newer style rescues that everybody's switching to. But we in Rockville actually were faced with a scenario which, before I even get into that, just a little bit of the setup of how our current Pierce Rescue Squad is, Rescue Squad 703. The way it's configured, for people who don't know, our current rescue squads pretty much have everything on it, everything you can possibly imagine when it comes to rescue operations, whether it's vehicle stabilization, heavy vehicle stabilization or extrications, water rescues, ice rescues, rope rescues, and obviously firefighting. But we actually had a scenario in Rockville where we were dispatched as the rescue squad, where we had 2 kids stuck in ice. And it was one of those situations just based on the current configuration of how things are set up. Our ice water rescue equipment is located on the top of the rig in the coffin compartment. So had that been a situation where the officer didn't pre-plan how he wanted to conduct that type of incident, if it was to happen, we would have been put in a situation where we would have had to arrive on scene, climb up top, retrieve the suits, and then climb down and then outfit our members with the suits to enter the ice. Those are one of those situations where we looked at that and we decided to say, hey, we need to have something where, obviously the fire service is a very safety conscious. We want to make sure everybody's in their seatbelts kind of environment. but we wanted to look at something where we can say, hey, we need to have a place for our people to get outfitted into these suits, whether they're going to an ice rescue, whether they're going to a rope rescue. We needed to have a place where people could be in the unit safely and outfitting the proper equipment for that particular call, whether it be an ice rescue, whether it be a rope rescue where we got to outfit our guys in the harnesses. So when the guys from New Haven came down, that was one of the things that was one of my talking points to them, to highlight some of those things that they would probably have to face, especially being New Haven and New England. We all know New England gets really, really cold up there. And the last thing you want to do is not be able to have a place for people to get outfitted going down the road, as well as a place to actually rehab the people after the incident. So that was one of the biggest things that I was pushing on New Haven. And we were actually able to take them around to see the different kinds. If you have never been to Maryland, you can come down to Maryland and you can see that there are many different style heavy rescue trucks with different types, whether they're walk-ins, walk-throughs, or walk-arounds. We were able to show New Haven, the city of New Haven, a lot of different styles and different manufacturers of walk-in or walk-through rescue companies.
And I think what's really important is that no matter what your background is, we all have blind spots. So by having a committee with different individuals with differing backgrounds, it really covers your blind spots. And New Haven really thanks Montgomery County, Maryland, Pete, Prince George's County, Maryland, and John for working with the committee and basically opening up their home to show off their apparatus and tell us the pros and the cons. Chris, what's been your experience with the heavy rescues, the walk-in versus the walk-around?
So I work in Washington, D.C., and we're operating 3 walk-in rescues. Obviously, I rode the Mac R model rescue squad at Rockville that was also a walk-in. And to the point that RJ made, there is a great advantage to having an area to dress out and put on your rope rescue or your ice rescue, PPE as fastly as possible and out of the weather. Our current squads in the county are walk around. There's only one walk through squad in Montgomery County right now with the Wheaton Volunteer Rescue Squad. And the discussion in Montgomery County, and I know RJ faced this on the Montgomery County Committee, is Montgomery is not interested in the walk through right now because they want to ensure that everybody's seated and belted while they're moving, which is obviously very important to us. But the reason that they're kind of going down that road is that there's no crash safety data that shows what will happen to a firefighter that's seated sideways in the back of a walk-in rescue squad. So that's something to really look into the manufacturers nationwide. If they could get that data out there, it'll help departments be able to make a better decision on what type of vehicle to buy for their department. Currently the only thing you can compare it to, some of my committee members say, well, an ambulance is the same thing. You ride sideways in the ambulance, you have the 5-point harness, but that's obviously not as big, not as heavy, and not carrying as much equipment that could become a projectile to you. So that's one thing that manufacturers, I think, could really look into to help us out as committees.
Chris, I think that's a great point. I've never heard that point before, and that's why it's so important to get fire engineering and check out our Hangouts. Have you heard that argument about the no crash data?
It has been brought up. For the most part, a lot of times what departments will do, especially with their walkthrough rescues, is they'll have a bigger cab. So the seating is mainly in the cab. So you have your entire crew, your officer and driver that are sitting up in the cab where everything's all DOT, OSHA, NFPA, certified. And most of your storage is in the back. But like in the case of New Haven, you do have guys sitting sideways.
And girls.
And yeah, that's what I meant. Thank you. But yeah, and there are cases where guys are sitting in the back, and that has been brought up as a safety concern. But because for the most part, the body of the truck is seen as just, especially on a rescue, it's seen as a toolbox. We don't have the safety data on it or the testing. So,
but departments for years have had heavy rescues, even going back to Rockville back in the day, the R model that we so fondly love. The fact is that I don't think that's an overwhelming concern. I hate the argument that people say, well, we can't have firefighters in the back because they won't wear their seatbelts. That's not a equipment issue. That's a failed leadership issue. If your personnel aren't taking directions to wear seatbelts in 2019, it's not a fault of the apparatus. It's a fault of leadership and the culture of the entire department. So let's get that part straight. I do encourage manufacturers to get safety data on members riding sideways. I think that that is a valid point that should be explored. But I do feel the apparatus is safe, and we've seen rescue apparatus get into accidents without major catastrophes other than dealing with firefighters who aren't seatbelted. RJ, you want to weigh in on this?
No, I'm over here shaking my head because I 100% agree with you. And I'll even go a step further to say that I haven't ridden in many of them, but I can say that volunteering in Rockville, before getting hired in Frederick County, working at Bethesda Chevy Chase Rescue Squad, number one, knowing Wheaton's configuring layout, Montgomery County's old rescue squads that were walkthroughs. I can't tell you that I've ever seen any one of them not have seatbelts in them. They had seats back there. They have seatbelts in them. It's not like these companies are building these boxes where you don't have an option to sit down and buckle in. My biggest driving force is making sure that you have a place for the people to prepare for the operation that we're going on. I sit around with the guys at the firehouse all the time. We sit out back, we smoke cigars and chop it up. And some of my biggest things is I agree that no fire chief, no operations chief, nobody wants to pull behind a rescue company and see guys just back there hanging out, standing up, having a good time. I agree with that statement, and I agree with that mindset. But on the flip side of that, and I'll use this term very loosely, but when we arrive on scene, people want to see those doors open up and people step off the rig ready to rock and ready to do the job.
Yeah, I like seatbelts on, doors open, so that as soon as it arrives, you get unbelted and you get to work. So another thing that came out about the walk around rescues is, and I know that all the manufacturer reps and sales managers, they want to sell you every bell and whistle out there, but there's this trend out there for these big, long pullouts. And I think that when manufacturers went through this is just my opinion, I don't think they looked at enough data that there's a crown in the road and that sometimes those tend to be extremely difficult to pull out.
Frank, you know that drives me nuts.
What's that?
That drives me nuts, and that was one of the things that I told New Haven. And just looking at the configuration of our rescue squad, I'll say my best friend, God rest his soul, Sander Cohen, but he was a big rescue guy when we all lived in the firehouse, when we all were there all the time. And Sander was fairly short. And it was one of those things where we had those transverse compartments that go through and through. And depending on the terrain that the rig was parked on, if you were on a hill, if you were pulling it out from the officer side and the slope was to the driver's side, you couldn't get that transverse compartment out with 2 or 3 people helping you pull it in your feet up on the rig to try to get it out. On the contrary to that, if you had the rig parked on the terrain where the slope was to the officer's side and you were on the officer's side and you went to go pull that transverse compartment out, I mean, get ready, you're going for a ride. So, those transverse compartments, and ultimately, I guess it also matters on what you have mounted to it. But on our particular setup, the way we have it, we have all of our struts, our heavy rig and chains and all that stuff. I mean, those are no light feats for anybody going to use that equipment. And I would say that for the people that don't know Rockville, that don't know Montgomery County, we have a lot of interstate. We have Interstate 270. We have Interstate 495. We have some areas in Montgomery County where they protect 95. So we have a lot of interstate where the opportunities for our rescue rigs to be on the highways, on the streets, doing work are very great. I would say every day our rescue rigs are on the interstate doing some kind of work where we're opening up the compartment doors. Whether we're cutting or not cutting, we're still, I would probably venture to say, just about every call, we're opening up a compartment door of some sort to pull out, whether it's the equipment or a broom, just to sweep up the debris in the street.
And one of the things that's key about apparatus is we're not saying our way is the best way. Your jurisdiction has to make a decision, but that decision should be informed by reaching out, working with your sales rep, working with the manufacturer's rep. And that's what we loved about John, is he really wasn't there with an agenda, which you see a lot of salespeople do. He kind of said, listen, what do you want? How do we get there? And he encouraged us to ask as many questions, go take a look at these different fire departments and try to come up what works best for your location. So when you're out here listening to this, remember, the goal is to just cover your blind spots and work with firefighters across the country and your committee. What's been your experience, pros and cons of working with apparatus committees?
So working with an apparatus committee, it depends on the makeup of the committee. If you got some guys who have a bunch of different backgrounds, it can be very, very useful. If you got some guys, some firefighters that, are riding these rigs, from an operations standpoint, they can really help with setting up the rig itself. And, having, sometimes when you have a mechanic on the committee as well, it can really help you with, how their shop works and, what parts and what brands, they keep in stock or what they like to work with. Having a chief, keeping in mind safety, some different operations aspects, just having guys from different backgrounds, it's very, very useful. A lot of times you see departments will have just the chief make a decision, and chiefs have a big job. They're responsible to the taxpayers, they're responsible to their guys, and a lot of times they don't look at it from every single angle. That's why it's good to have a whole committee where you have multiple opinions, multiple perspectives, that can really make a very well-rounded truck.
And one of the things with the committee that's important to consider is, what are the tactical objectives of your piece of apparatus and how does your department operate? That has to be part of the equation. The shop's got to look at the mechanical side,
Absolutely.
But sometimes we see the shop overstep and their decisions are actually, what are the tactical considerations of how you're using that apparatus? So it's important to have the balance. Before I go to Chris, I also want to let in on something else that I see across the country. Chief officers, all too often, when they were in a position to make a decision, and I always believe that the closer you can make the decision doing the function, the better this decision tends to be. But because as they came up through the ranks, they weren't empowered to make the decisions when they were the ones that were closest to the problems. Now all of a sudden they become a chief, and now they want to make a decision on something that has absolutely zero impact on life safety, incident stabilization, or property conservation. They want to say where the hook is mounted, when they will never grab a hook again in their career because they were never empowered as firefighters. So it's this continued cycle of abuse. It's like the abused kid who becomes the abuser. And we need to break that to have quality leadership. And I want Chris to weigh in on this because he's a chief, and then to RJ. And Chris, if you're making decisions about where the hooks are going, you're wrong. And tell your dad I said that because I have a lot of respect for your father. Go ahead.
So, I agree with you 100%, Frank, and that's one of the great things about us at Rockville is, we're such a large volunteer fire department with 200 active members. Guys like RJ as a captain here, he's making decisions every day. He's in the firehouse. He's managing those people and he's involved in these projects. He's on our apparatus committee, and we've had discussions about what tools and equipment we're going to buy. Before I went and bought everything, I had that discussion with RJ, and we made those decisions together rather than me just doing it behind everyone's back. And that's really what's good about the makeup of our committee. Most of the guys on our committee are drivers of the rigs in our firehouse. Some of them are also line officers. I'm the committee chair as a chief officer, so that I can kind of keep everybody in check and be a formal representative to the manufacturers and representatives. And then we also have a couple guys that just all they do is ride in the back. And that's important too, because you can lose sight sometimes, like you said, with the maintenance staff. They're concerned about how easy is it going to be to fix the fire truck, and that overcomes the tactical abilities of the unit. Same thing with guys that all they do is drive or ride the seat. If you don't have somebody that's getting off and pulling that hook off the fire truck or pulling that hose line off the engine company, you may end up misstepping something somewhere.
RJ, would you like to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, Chris hit everything that I was going to say. But along with that, I would say, and not to, boast Rockville, but I think we did do a pretty good job with how we set up the committee. I think everything was pretty fair the way we did it. We didn't exclude anybody. We had initially a lot of people who signed up to wanting to be on the committee. All of our committees at the Rockville Volunteer Fire Department are open to anybody. But where we did lose people was we told them the amount of commitment that was up front, that they needed up front. So people knew that it's not just, hey, we're going to put together a parade piece. We're putting together a committee that's going to do a lot of research. It's going to do a lot of data studies. It's going to do a lot of traveling back and forth. It's going to require lots of meetings to put together a practical fire truck that we're all going to need and want. I think that our committee group, and like Chris said, and I'll just tap in on that. Our committee group comes from lots of backgrounds where we have guys that are officers, we have guys that are chief officers, we have guys that are back step guys. One of the things that was pretty instrumental when I was working on the county squad committee was that when you have a makeup of people who are all, let's say, just officers, people lose sight of some of the different things that the back step guys who don't like or like. When we talk about the transverse compartments, when we talk about the different equipment and all that kind of stuff. So that all plays a huge factor in it when we get down to the nitty gritty. And when people realize the amount of work that goes into it, those people will self-weed themselves out. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'll tell you this, Frank, Chris actually is one of those chiefs, and we do have a few other chiefs that they don't mind where the hook is mounted, and they will still ride the rig and take the hook off that spot to go do work. So,
well, as long as they're not doing it in the chief capacity, because if a chief working with his hands, they're not working with their mind. If they're typing in a computer, it's the same as having a hook in. They need an aid. But I also want to just digress and go back to what you said about committees and about encouraging participation. In New Haven, we did the same thing. We encouraged as much participation as possible, but you couldn't have everybody at the table. So what we chose to do for our apparatus committee is each committee based off the particular apparatus. So with the truck company, we picked 2 individuals to be the lead on the truck company. With the rescue company, they picked a couple individuals to be the lead on that. And what they did was have a subcommittee meeting with everybody who wanted to be involved on the union side to come in, sit, give their opinion, and then those 2 individuals would take all the information, all the data, and then make the presentation and work with the chief's office. And firefighters also have to understand, and officers, that if you're on this committee, at the end of the day, you may put everything forward and feel that you justified it and you made the best possible arguments based off safety and research. And at the end of the day, Chief Hinde might come in and say, no, this is the way we're doing it. And that's okay. That's why they're chiefs. So just because you don't get your way, it's not about getting your way 100% of the time. It's about being a stakeholder and trying to move the conversation forward and trying to advocate for your members as much as possible. But at the end of the day, some individual is going to make the decision. And not all your men and women on your fire department may agree with that decision. That's called leadership. So just because you don't get your way on 1 or 2 things, don't be chucking a rock at management because they gave you a seat at the table. It's important for whether you're a career or volunteer department that the chiefs hear us. And then at the end of the day, we have to respect that they are going to make some decisions because there are some budget constraints as well, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, budgets play a huge role. And, I think with budgets, a lot of times, sometimes committees will have issues focusing on what's a practical need versus what's a cosmetic need. And a lot of times you see departments.
Wait, we can't get rotorays on every piece mandatory with Mars lights? What's going on here?
I know. I thought, for the most part, fire trucks really just go to parades. I thought that was their primary job.
But it's no different than fire gear, PPE. There's as much that goes into personal protective clothing as apparatus, and yet a lot of people focus on color of the gear more than anything else. So
I was literally getting ready to say that, Frank. That was one of my key points. There's been even in our jurisdictions around us where I work at, Frederick County, Maryland, Loudoun County, Virginia, that's another good one around us. They pull people off the floor with the experience and the knowledge, and that also helps you get the buy-in of the department, of the people on the floor in the department. Because obviously everybody has an opinion about something. You can't take everybody's opinion. If you took everybody's opinions, the fire trucks would be, ungodly long and have everything on it that you don't need. But when you take the people off the floor who have the experience and then those people conversate with the other people on the floor, hey, what are some of the things that you guys, since I'm on the committee, what are some of the things that you guys don't like? What are some of the things that you guys would like to see? If I can help, bring that to the table, if I can help us get that, I'll try my best. I think that is a huge point of getting the buy-in of the people, because once you get the buy-in of the people, when the apparatus backs in the station, those people will then help take care of it. Those people will then take pride in it, because whether they were on the committee or not, they still feel like they had an input in it. Does that make sense?
Well, something you could add on that too, RJ, and I'm thinking about this as we're talking about it. It's great. We're at Rockville, we're doing a nice job talking to the members in the station because we have a well-rounded committee and the people are communicating with one another on a daily basis. But, even in a larger department, it's possible. Your apparatus committee could set up a public forum where you're having a meeting, at the training academy or somewhere where it's open to the members to come and kind of provide their feedback with the committee for consideration in the future.
RJ, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, no, I definitely. I hate to keep saying that I agree with Chris, but no, I do agree with him. I don't really have much pushback on any of that.
Now, John, how do you encourage, as a sales rep, working with a committee versus one person, or do you pretty much let the department dictate it? And what's your experience both ways?
It all depends. There have been times where working with a committee can be great. There are times where working with a committee can be a nightmare. From a sales standpoint, working with a chief is great. You got to talk to one guy. You got to please one guy. You got to make it work for one guy. He tells you, you want this. That's the end of the story. You just get in the truck, however he wants it. As a firefighter, I believe that you should have a committee, simply because, like I said before, it gets you a lot of different perspectives. But the one thing I would definitely caution against is having too many guys on the committee, because I will tell you, I've had some nightmare committees, not because the guys were necessarily difficult, but because, you got these committees of 14, 15, 16 guys, and, you got 16 guys in a room trying to make a decision on something, and it just becomes a nightmare.
And I think that the chief alluded to it earlier, and I think that's what we addressed in New Haven by appointing one or two members, male or female. What it allows you to do is to structure the committee. The danger for fire departments is you put 14 people, firefighters, on a committee, and everybody's got their opinion. There has to be structure, whether the chief is the chair of the committee, or they make a chair, or you have two representatives from your volunteer department or your union speaking for the committee. There's a filter before it goes to the table. And I think that the danger is you put 14 firefighters on committee, you won't ever get anything done because of the competing interest. So you either have to have a chairman, or you have to have that subcommittee meeting so that you can keep it structured and keep with timelines. Chris, can you weigh in on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm sitting here kind of laughing inside as you're saying these things. We have 11 members on our committee right now. And as well-rounded as everybody is, there's definitely times when people are butting heads, and you got to sit there and kind of call everybody and say, okay, look, we need to get back on our focus and let's keep moving. Different people have different activity levels in the committee, so that breeds some tension sometimes. So it's all about keeping a good check and balance. For us, we also have a co-chairman of our committee. That way, if something happens to me, he's CC'd on every communication with the sales rep, and he can follow along everything.
That was a quick thing. Chris's dog was going to get him, I think.
Yeah, she's going nuts over the lawnmower. But I think another thing for the committee to kind of look at for us is we have one apparatus committee, and that's spec'ing all the apparatus. And of course, we're not buying things in as much volume as larger municipalities are, but I think it's good to have communication across your committees so that you can have some blended things. There's certain things that are important. We built this new tower ladder. We wanted to make sure that the dash layout, even though the truck was a different manufacturer, was as similar, so that when the driver gets in and he goes to flip on the emergency lights, the switches were laid out in the same, scenario. Same thing with, the Jake brake switch in the same location, so that muscle memory is developed over time through your drivers. And you can't fix everything from manufacturer to manufacturer, because there are certain things that are, kind of stuck in one position. But having that consistency, that's the one thing that I think is good about having a uniformed approach to it versus an individual committee for engine and trucks. Obviously, that's necessary in larger departments, but making sure that those committees, have some sort of cross communication.
And I think we also have to work between that Ford and Chevy mentality, because a lot of times you get an apparatus committee and you'll have one person say, this is the only fire truck in America. This is the only fire truck in Canada. But the fact of the matter is, every manufacturer has its pros and its cons. And then not only do you got to look at the apparatus, you also got to look at what's the serviceability of the apparatus. Do they have the support mechanics and staff and manufacturer reps to service the actual apparatus? So there's a whole lot that goes into that decision making, and you should never just get into that mindset of, I only want this for one thing. And one thing that does disturb me as a fiscal conservative is when departments out there rig the bid. And we all know how they do it. They say the manufacturer has to be in business for 26 years when the other ones were only in service for 25 years. Or it has to have this certain suspension, but only one manufacturer makes that suspension. Or it has to have this motor because only one manufacturer makes the motor. And the taxpayers are left with trusting the committee and the fire chief on what they're going to get when the bid really isn't a realistic bid. I love making John a little uncomfortable. That's my job. But would you agree that that is a common practice throughout the United States of it's a form of bid rigging? And I know that you can't say that. I'm not going to put words in your mouth. But when you do a bid, it should at least have some options to it.
No, I absolutely agree. When the problem with bids like that is it doesn't give most guys a chance. When you have a manufacturer's specs that you're bidding to, and like you said, it's a very specific suspension, or it's designed a very specific way. When you have a very, very specific set of specs that you're bidding to, it builds a terrible truck. Because for example, Rosenbauer, we do our trucks a certain way. So if you want me to build, a Rosenbauer like another manufacturer, you're not going to get a great truck, because that's I'm trying to build what they do best, not what a Rosenbauer does best.
And everybody has their pros and cons. Chris, weigh in on that.
So I've seen a lot, and I've actually had a lot of discussion with our current sales rep over a lot of these things. If you're a big component, you like one manufacturer and you write your bid and you tailor it to that manufacturer, and then you send it out so that you're getting the bids and following the bid process, you're going to end up with not that truck that you want, like you guys said, but you're going to end up seeing really skewed pricing. Because if you're trying to buy a Pierce, and that's what you have, and you submit that Pierce spec to Rosenbauer and Seagrave and Suffin, they're going to come back because they do things differently, and you're asking for specific, criteria, and their bid is going to be way higher.
Absolutely, 100%. Absolutely, 100%. I mean, if what I've seen in the past, some departments will put out, very simple 13-page spec saying, hey, we want a hail pump, wattress pump, 1,500 gallons. We want rescue style compartments, hinge doors, very, very generic specs, and say, all right, guys, go. And, we build the truck the way we build it best. And like the chief just said, our pricing is going to be skewed, because when we're trying to build to another manufacturer's spec, if we don't build it that exact way, that's considered a special option. So now the pricing on something that's so minutely different could be a lot higher just because that's not our standard. So, Chief, just like you nailed it. You're not getting a very well-built truck, and you're not getting competitive price, when the whole point of a bid is to be getting competitive pricing.
So that's something to consider. Now, sometimes the department knows exactly what they want, and they're not trying to skew it, but they just want to get what they want. But it has to be balanced with how much does this thing actually cost, and is it going to perform the functions we need it to perform? Because budget and functionality is a part of the process. So we just want everybody to be informed. And when you get on that committee, I want members to be able to look out for that, where if somebody from the shop or somebody from the sales company or somebody's where they're just basically steering it, that this is what you're going to end up with. And so the point is, the committee really doesn't matter. I think the committee should matter to give the chief a good idea before, so the chief can make the informed decision before they put out that final spec of what they're looking for. RJ, weigh in on that.
So I didn't have too much of a hand with that when it came to the aerial tower that we just spec'd out in Rockville. With a lot of the stuff, work and training and stuff that I had going on, I wasn't too much into the budget scene. I was a lot more into the practicality of the apparatus, whether it be the layout, the configuration, the tools, equipment, that kind of stuff. Chris and the other guys on the committee, they worked really well with that. The one thing I can say is, when it came to the budget things and the things that they brought back to the committee, in multiple meetings, we laid out different drawings and said, all right, guys, like, we can go with this, we can go with that. We had to, as a committee, ask our department for their first their blessing, and then the approval to have the money. So we had to make sure that we were very specific in our options and making sure that we picked the right things, so that we can make sure that we didn't exceed the budget and we didn't go over. Because once you start going over the budget, and then you got to go back and ask for more money and go back and ask for more money, it kind of doesn't make you look good. And especially if you're working in the municipality, whereas you're like a city department or a county department, when you got to go to your mayor, you got to go to your county executive and say, hey, listen, we need more money. We figured out that the truck that we want, that we originally told you after we add all these bells and whistles, is going to cost us more. Your credibility is going to start to go down. So I think that we did a pretty good job when it came to sticking to our budget, looking at the options, looking at where we can trim things, but still not shortchange. I think that, that is without a doubt the way to go. You just have to make sure that whoever is on your committee, that one person's going to take that lead in that role and still bring that information back to the committee to relay that information.
Robert, we lost you there at the end of your statement. You froze. You're muted, Robert.
What was the last thing that you heard me say?
Oh, now I'd have to go back to the transcript. Chris, looks like you. Go ahead.
My point was to just make sure that you have somebody from the committee who's going to keep an eye on that, somebody who's going to keep the guys policed on that. Because again, I don't know if you heard me when I said that, but if you're the type of committee that has to go back to your chief or go back to your city mayor or your county executive or board members, whoever you have to go back to, and you're asking for more money and then you ask for more money again, your credibility starts to go down. And when your credibility starts to go down, you don't want to drive them to the point where they say, all right, you know what, let's nix this or let's revisit this at another time. And then you're back to square one, and then now you're stuck with not getting anything that you want. So I think that we as a committee did a very good job in making sure that we had those numbers that we couldn't exceed. We had the numbers for the options of the things that we wanted. Again, not having all the bells and whistles, but not shortchanging either.
John, when it comes to the budget process, and from the time that somebody says, I'm going to go with a Rosenbauer, what's the normal time it takes to plan and put together an engine or a truck? Just, we may have a listener here who's never been part of this process. So,
I mean, the process varies with every single department. There are some departments that I've been working on trucks for, maybe 2-3 years. There's some departments that I've been working with for 4 months, and we're able to, go pretty quickly. It really all depends on your town's finances. It depends on how early the committee will start, how often they'll meet. There are some committees that will meet every other week, and they're on top of the ball. They're on top of their game. They're meeting with guys. They're taking a look at trucks. They're working with their towns or municipalities, getting the money. It can vary so much. Like I said, I've been working with some towns 2-3 years. There's some that, as little as 4 or 5 months.
And there's one thing that can help that process, and I'll go to Chris with this, is that a lot of departments out there, the reason that it takes so long is they don't have a plan.
No.
And if you're the fire department is going to outlast all of us. The day I leave New Haven will still put out fires the same day. So we all got to be planning for us to leave, in a sense. So the fire department should have a plan of when they're going to buy engines, when they're going to buy trucks, when they're going to buy their heavy rescue. It shouldn't be a surprise. And if a chief of department comes to you and says, oh, well, we got to rush this through because we need this, unless there was some catastrophic thing that wasn't planned for with a piece of apparatus, the fact is this should be laid out. And if it's laid out, that will help with your funding and help with the budget process. Chris, do you have a plan in Rockville? And then we'll go to RJ if there's a plan in Frederick County on how they purchase apparatus.
So I'm hoping you're seeing on the screen right now, I have pulled up, Rockville actually has an apparatus replacement schedule for our corporation-owned vehicles. That schedule, this policy actually lays out what the process is for us to review apparatus that we have, make recommendations as the apparatus committee to the fire chief, and follow through with our board of directors on when something's due to be replaced. The policy actually also lines out in it when there's a schedule for when things are due to be replaced and when they're due to be reviewed. And that's coupled with a live document that actually has every vehicle in our fleet, the anticipated year of replacement, what the vehicle is, make and model, and what the anticipated cost is. And having things like that actually makes it really easy for you to present to not only internally to your department, but to your municipality or whoever's providing that funding for you. And I know every volunteer fire department across the country gets their funding in different sources, whether it comes from the township or tax funds or grant money. But if you have this plan laid out and you have it in writing, and it's not something that you got to scramble to come up with, you can be confident in your presentation to these things. This is something that we actually talked to a few other chiefs throughout the area, places like the Bowie Volunteer Fire Department, Dale City Volunteer Fire Department. They all have similar plans like this where it's laid out how it's going to happen, what the anticipated cost is, so that if you're going to the municipality and trying to stack dollar signs, they can see this document live and they know, okay, in 2029, we're going to have to buy another, rescue squad, and it's going to cost this much, and they're stockpiling the funds to be prepared for it. And I think large municipalities do a decent job with apparatus replacement schedules sometimes, but I think that everybody on this call is pretty aware that sometimes the politics get in the way there. And while the guys in the fire department might have a good idea of when we're going to replace something, you end up riding around in a fire truck that's 20 years old on its last leg because funding was cut or the politicians didn't want to follow the funding scheme.
And one of the problems in America is that the politicians don't understand the fire department's budget. So the favorite question to ask any individual that's becoming a fire chief anywhere is, in the interview process, they tell them to cut your budget by 10%. And it's really a trick question because most of the costs in a career department are fixed because it's wages, it's healthcare, it's benefits. So when it comes to saving money, the very first thing and pretty much only thing that isn't dictated by the contract is capital projects, apparatus, buildings, and it usually builds in a delay. The issue, speaking of this, is when you talk about, to Chris Hinde, when he's talking about having a plan, it's not just the delay that year. That delay, when they put in a delay for a piece of apparatus, now it expands out. And we're going to ask Chris if we could tweet out a link to the document that he provided. And Chris, how long projected out is your plan for apparatus? Because it appears very impressive.
Yeah.
So our plan right now is a little outdated. We're actually in the middle of getting ready to revise the policy because the years that we looked at for replacing, we're looking, okay, we bought a rescue squad in 1968 and 1983, and it was replaced in 2008. So our timeline was a little bit off. Same thing with our engines, but we're getting ready to actually update the life expectancy of apparatus based on common practices. But I think now I've actually got the policy up so everybody's kind of seeing it. And this just lays out how we will go through this process as a committee. And then here's that live document where it shows the anticipated cost when the vehicle's due for replacement. And since we share replacement responsibility with Montgomery County, Maryland, you'll note that some of these vehicles in here, they say that they're owned by Montgomery County and they're going to be replaced by Montgomery County. And we're actually replacing some of the vehicles that Montgomery County owns with corporation-owned apparatus so that it can be tailored to meet the needs of our members and tailored to meet the needs of our community.
Chris, how can this is archived? So some of our viewers will want to see that document after the live show is over. Is there a way that they can find that document or get a copy of that document?
I'll have to try and put it in a link somewhere that people can access it. Right now, it's on our secure server. But yeah, that's something that we could probably come up with a little bit later today.
Oh, terrific. So we'll work with fire engineering to get a link from Chris Hinde or even just a Photoshop of kind of a snapshot of the plan, because I think that has a lot of value, because you would think in 2019, planning would be the one thing the fire department figured out. But ironically, if you look at the fire department, we're great at responding and mitigating emergencies. But yet if it's not on fire or somebody isn't screaming for help, we tend to do a very poor job on the back end, where other places tend to do a bad job on the front end. The front of our house is in order. You call 911, we show up, we're there to help. We provide the best service. Where we're lacking, where I see a credit to Montgomery County, Rockville, and Frederick, is they are planning way out. And Chris, how far did your plan go out? I missed what you said.
So right now, we're looking at every vehicle that we have, what its anticipated replacement is. So we have a 2015 engine company. We know that we're going to replace engines about 12 years. So, it says in the document, we're anticipating replacing this in 2027, what the anticipated cost is. And that's so that we can share that with the municipality in hopes of, receiving some funding from the city of Rockville or even regular fundraising. The other policy that we have in place is a apparatus graphic standardization. And that's something too that I think, most people think, oh, our fire trucks look the same, but we kind of put that into play because we want to make sure that nobody, no matter who is in charge of the job that I'm doing now, years down the road, that the, history, the tradition, and the community representation is there on our apparatus. So that's something to think about too. You can't write everything into policy about the specification of your vehicle, obviously, but there are certain things that you can kind of lay out in a document for your membership or your department to follow to ensure consistency.
RJ, weigh in on that.
Yeah, so as most people know, I work in Frederick, Maryland, which is the county which is home of the National Fire Academy. Frederick, Maryland is a combination fire department, so we still have volunteer corporations. So a lot of the firehouses in Frederick County, the corporations still have control over what apparatus they purchase, what apparatus they spec. Frederick County Fire Rescue as a whole, the career side or the county division, if you want to call it, we just in 20, I would say end of 2016, going into 2017, put together our first career committee of career members that were a battalion chief, a lieutenant, some firefighters who put together 4 engine companies. So, Frank, I'm going to use this time to drop in a shameless plug, but engine company 20, engine 2 from Station 2, engine 3 from my firehouse, engine 33 from 33 engine, and then engine 25. Those are the 4 new wagons that we spec'd out here in Frederick County. And we also put together an aerial, a piece of aerial apparatus. So we had just established our first career side apparatus committee. And I would honestly say that we did a pretty good job doing that. A lot of the guys took a lot of the things that they saw or liked or feedback from the other guys on the floor to help spec out that apparatus. On the flip side of that, we do have volunteer corporations who in this county can put together a committee or their lack of and back in a piece of apparatus in the firehouse where the career side is still responsible for putting it on the street. So I've seen both ends of it. I've seen both sides of it. I would venture to say that Frederick County on the career side, the government portion of it, we are now into the portion where, we're now into the part where we are establishing a timeline for our apparatus. But this is still new to us because we literally just, as the career side, bought 4-5 new pieces of apparatus where I have 13 years on the job and I don't remember the last brand new piece of apparatus that we had since I've been on the job. And I could be wrong, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. So I know our department's in the process of figuring out a plan for apparatus replacement. We tossed around a lot of different ideas, whether we purchase it, whether we lease it, that kind of stuff. So I don't really have 100% knowledge on what our actual plan is going to be. I know that our department's in the process of working on one.
Great. And that's the key. You have to have planning. And something I wanted to just cover that I alluded to a little bit earlier. And again, I am not one of those people who say you got to buy a Chevy or you got to buy a Ford. You got to get together with your committee, your chief, work together and ensure that it meets the tactical considerations, the tactical objectives of your fire department, and also consider the shop on working on this stuff and let the chief make the decision in the end, but at least everybody has a place at the table. So I'm not just one piece of apparatus or another. Everybody knows New Haven had a problem with the Pierce fire trucks with the wheels falling off. I don't think any fire truck should have its wheels fall off, but that problem was fixed. Now we're moving on to a totally new issue. And our members have had a problem with repeated failures of a Suffin aerial apparatus. And it's nothing against Suffin as a manufacturer, because the older apparatus, the spare apparatus that they're in right now, is a Suffin, and all the members have confidence in the older Suffin. It's a very particular model. It's the Suffin 2013 SPH 100. And what happened is, after multiple failures, truckies shouldn't have to rescue truckies. And at one point, Truck 3 had to rescue our members out of the bucket. I was a command officer at a hazardous material incident where we had a civilian who was a trained specialist in the bucket moving to the roof to shut off the king valve on an anhydrous ammonia leak, and the bucket got stuck there. They then tested the truck. It passed ladder testing, and then yet it failed and the bucket upended again. There's been at least 2 occasions where firefighters been rescued from the bucket by other truckies. So the members of the company, which I give them a lot of credit, the officers and drivers and firefighters from that house got together and wrote a non-adversarial letter to the fire chief, Chief Alston, who was the first chief in New Hampshire. Credit for that. He viewed the letter not as an adversarial thing and realized that the members do have a legit and bona fide safety concern with this very particular piece of SUFFIN apparatus, 2013 SPH 100. And the members all signed a letter. And then today I was very proud of our executive board. A motion was made concerning the health and safety concerns of our members with this newer piece of apparatus. And the board voted unanimously to have a no confidence vote in a specific model year New Haven's SUFFIN aerial truck that's not in service at this time. And again, it's not a shot at the manufacturer because our members have confidence in the older one, but we do not feel that this apparatus is safer. And I am hoping that the chief's office works with Corporation Counsel's office and SUFFIN will rectify this very quickly so that this thing can be addressed, because we don't want our members on that piece of apparatus. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of this being done before. Dave Rhodes years ago took a no confidence vote when he was union president in Atlanta over breathing apparatus. And so I thank Dave because I've had the opportunity to kind of be mentored by Dave, and we were talking in Tulsa, and I said, maybe this is the way to go with this. RJ and Chris, we're at the witching hour. If you guys want to say the last word of the day, and then I'll end it with John. Go ahead, Robert.
I just want to say that I think we hit a lot of good points today. I am a strong believer in apparatus committees. Frank, I think that we laid out all the reasons why, and we laid out the reasons why, you shouldn't not have it, I guess you could say. But ultimately, obviously, every place does something different. New Haven does something different than Frederick. Frederick does something different than Rockville. But the last little bits that I want to leave people with is, no matter where you come from, no matter what your plan is, the most important thing is you need to find out what works for you and your community and find people who are educated in it to help you put together the type of apparatus you need. Spec'ing out an apparatus that's going to serve your community, that's going to serve the purpose that you're trying to serve. That's not something you can just roll in with and just get at a grocery store. I'll take that one right over there. That's not how it works. Sitting down with a committee, spec'ing out the things that you want to have, talking to people who are educated in the equipment and the machines themselves. That's just, there's no better way to do business. So I agree with a lot of the different ideas and thoughts that we toyed around with today. And I, as always, want to thank you, Frank, for having me on.
Well, you're one of the co-hosts now, so we welcome you here to our Google Hangout. You're a fine addition, and I think it brings a national view to our Google Hangout. It helps having different perspectives, so we're really glad you're here. Chief Hinde, would you like to weigh in on the last word of the day? We really appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys inviting me to talk, and it's been super helpful because even today, I've thought of new things that I can do to improve our process. And the one thing I'll leave everybody with is this is an important process that you go through buying a piece of apparatus. I know that ever since I first joined the fire department, when you're going to trade shows, really pay attention to the fire trucks that are there. Don't just look, oh, it's a pretty color, I like that. I like the Linex, diamond plate. Open the doors, open the compartments, see how people have mounted their equipment, look inside and see what features you can pick up, take pictures, take that back to your home, and get the best out of everything that you can to build the best possible piece for your department and your community. And, the attendance at the trade shows and stuff has been way down, but that's the one place where you can really get your hands on stuff. And if you don't have the opportunity to do something like that, our committee did a field trip day. We spent an entire, 8-10 hour day riding around to different fire departments, looking at their pumpers when we did our pumper and just getting ideas. Same thing when we did the tower. We went to 2 or 3 places that had the aerial scope, and we went through it with those people, and that's where you're going to get your best input going into it.
Well, Chief, you're a credit to the department, and as a past Rockville live-in, I always hold Rockville in a certain place in my heart. And John, can you weigh in on last words of wisdom? And I think that the takeaway from this is it doesn't matter who you are or what your background is. I learned a whole bunch of stuff from this very show. We all have blind spots, and by bringing more people together, more of our members, we cover some of those blind spots. So, John, we're going to give you the last word.
Absolutely. I mean, just RJ and Chief Hinde hit it. I mean, when it comes to committees and, buying apparatus, every single department in the country is different. Your department's going to be different than mine, just operationally and, things like that. So whatever works best for your department, whatever fits your department's needs, especially operationally, I think that's where, guys need to focus on, whether it's spec'ing out trucks, whether it's, getting guys on the committee, who's on the committee and whatnot. Whatever works for your department best. And, as Chief Hine was just saying about, trade shows and about weighing your options when it comes to manufacturers, a lot of times guys will get hung up on, the pretty options and what looks good when, you really got to find out, everyone nowadays makes a pretty good truck. There's no manufacturer out there that makes a bad truck. What you really got to focus in on is how each of them are different and what fits your department's needs the best.
And open the door to your committee. If you're just used to buying one truck, let other manufacturers come in and show you what they're doing, because competition breeds excellence.
Absolutely.
And I think we got a robust competition in the fire service market, and all of them deserve to be heard and not boxed out by one spec or another. That's it for today's Google Hangout. Please share it on Facebook, Twitter. Again, we thank Fire Engineering, FDIC, Fire Apparatus, Fire Rescue, all things that Fire Engineering and Clarion do. We hope to see you at FDIC. We really thank our new co-host. And as always, our thoughts and prayers to PJ Norwood and his family. He's going through a personal situation now, and we are all rooting for his wife. And we are all here for him at all times. And thanks for RJ for stepping up. Joe, if you could take us off the air, that's it for today's Google Hangout.